Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's panel, Improving Software Delivery in Federal with Value Stream Management. Our moderator for today's panel is Bart Kelly, one of Tasktop's regional sales managers working in Federal. And I will now just pass the baton to Bart to get started with today's panel.
Welcome to the panel discussion today. With that said, I'd like to sort of allow everybody to introduce themselves and talk a bit about their current role and their current objectives. And with that, I'd like to start with Dr. Emily Bohner, please.
Yeah, hi. I am Emily Bohner. I am the program manager for the program that we call Dragon Army Operations, which is under the umbrella of Space Camp, if you've heard of Space Camp, at the Catalyst campus in Colorado Springs. We've been chartered as the Rapid Reaction Software Factory under Delta Innovation, serving the Space Force Delta units. Dragon Army Operations specifically is about exposing software to an operational environment and getting feedback as early in the development cycle as possible. So we're trying to take what is traditionally a 2 to 5 year V&V process within our traditional acquisitions process, and we're trying to compress it down to weeks or months using lean startup, agile, DevOps, and DevSecOps, and all of the above.
Great, thank you. Moving on, Bryan Finster, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Bryan Finster. I actually just joined Platform One from Walmart after 19 years there. And Platform One is building out a secure delivery platform that we can use for the DoD and also anybody else who wants a secure way to deliver to Kubernetes. I'm a value stream architect there.
Great, thank you very much. Adam Furtado.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for having me. My name is Adam Furtado, the Chief of Platform at Air Force's Kessel software development organization, where we are attempting to just modernize the way that we get delivery to warfighters' hands in a quicker, more efficient way. Prior to being the Chief of Platform, I led all of our application development at Kessel was one of the original members, and have helped kind of lead the scaling that we've had from an original 5-person team about 4.5 years ago to over 1,300 now, and I have all the scars to prove it. But happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Mara?
Hi, I'm Mara. I'm a principal value stream architect here at Tasktop, and I've been at Tasktop for about 8 years. Used to work mostly with customers on their integration problems and solving integration issues, but now we've more moved into giving customers the visibility of the flow of work through their processes, and that's why Tasktop goes a lot along with value stream management. And yeah, I have spent half of my time in commercial, half in federal, so I have a really interesting spectrum of experiences with customers.
Excellent, thanks. And Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Worden. I'm a co-founder of Centil, and we are a very small company based in Boulder, Colorado, and we provide value stream management and agile coaching services focusing on the federal space.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, from a topic perspective today, we're really talking about value stream management. And this management technique or practice is really focused on increasing the flow of business value from a customer request or an idea to customer delivery or release. It's a systematic approach for measuring and improving flow and helping to find the bottlenecks within that delivery pipeline. The outcomes of that are to be able to shorten the time to market, increase throughput, improve product quality, and optimize for business outcomes. I'd like to ask the panelists, starting with Emily, how do you get started with value stream management, and where are you currently in the process of adoption?
All right, getting my mute button. Why are you forcing me to go first all the time? I don't get to bank off other people's answers. All right. Yeah, so I've been doing software focused efforts, not always software, sometimes software hardware integration for the DoD for a little over a decade now. And for a number of years, I'd been working programs for space domain awareness and space C2, which are incredibly software intensive. And I was seeing that these development programs would be going for years, yes, years, without any user feedback at all, or maybe getting a very superficial demo or feedback session once or twice a year, which I realized was not adequate for the things we're trying to develop. And I also witnessed the pain involved when you finally put a product in front of an operational user. Of course, that has very high expectations because, you know, they'd been waiting for years for someone to solve their problem. And then they throw up their hands and say, this isn't what we need. So with that and experiencing that pain, it was about that time that I read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, written in 2011. I read it a few years later, and I thought finally there's solutions to this. And I, of course, at that point dove into all the other DevOps must-reads, Phoenix Project, DevOps Handbook, more recently the Unicorn Project. And my biggest takeaways from that were that R&D is and technology development in the DoD is entrepreneurship. I mean, I guess I would call us intrapreneurs. And so we need to understand much earlier in the development cycle whether or not we're creating value. We need to be able to enable the pivot or persevere decisions referenced in the Lean Startup. Do we keep going on the path we're on, or do we change to something else that's going to create more value and going to create, greater operational utility? And the Lean Startup is focused on that customer behavior monitoring rather than saying, okay, customers, what do you want? Saying, let me observe my customers. Let me look at different effects that I want to create, achieving a specific task or customer conversion, and using these as metrics to drive your pivot or persevere decisions. And that was a huge light bulb for me. I think that finding the right metrics and the ways to measure the value creation presents some real unique challenges within the DoD. I think that we're missing a lot of the environment and a lot of the metrics that the commercial world gets for free almost. We don't have profit or loss. We don't have millions of customers that we can watch. And frankly, we can't be running experiments on them every day like the commercial world does on us. We often don't have access to our customers or don't have access directly to the customer's environments, customer being the warfighter. And don't have access to these on a regular basis. And so, and we're often creating software to handle scenarios that hopefully will never happen. For example, a large scale satellite collision and debris cascade. Those kinds of things, we hope we aren't going to observe our customers actually using those in reality very often, if at all. So to that last point, there's a lot of these unique challenges in the DoD that inspired my current program, Dragon Army Operations, where we've created a live virtual constructive exercise environment where we can throw our software through the ringer every 2 weeks if we want to. We run exercises on a bi-weekly basis. And then this endeavor also pulled me headlong into value stream management because there's got to be a feedback loop. And so the value stream management of what are the metrics we're looking for? How do we know we've created value? Presents our feedback loop back into our development cycle. And I really want to know whether the features I've just created add value so that we can make those pivot or persevere decisions. I'm convinced, honestly, this is what we have to be doing to enable our warfighters with the latest technology. This is the only way that we're going to be able to walk into solutions fast enough not to be obsolete with how fast the software world is moving.
Great, thank you very much.
So thank
Adam,
you.
any thoughts around that as well?
Yeah, so adoption's a funny word here for value stream management for me. I think I would be overselling to say that we've fully adopted value stream management in a meaningful way at Kessel. I think that from the kind of advent of what we were trying to do, value streams were always kind of at the foundation of the things that we were trying to achieve, right? We wanted to make sure that we really understood our business processes and we could figure out how work that we did at one part of our system actually created value elsewhere and where that was. We've taken a number of shots at figuring out how to visualize that in the proper way and have it like really inject into our decision making, but it's been a lot harder than than we thought it would be, to be quite honest. At one point, we had a full product team whose entire job was to figure out how to visualize and understand and instrument our value streams so we could really understand that better. And it became incredibly challenging. That first kind of shot at it, we focused on the values, like our users' value stream, how values created within the Air Operations Center in our world, as an example, and the variety of how our users work and the classification boundaries became super challenging for us to have that in a real meaningful way. So now we're focusing on our kind of IT value stream. As I moved over to the platform organization, it's a lot easier to kind of identify how work gets through our own system because we own all of it. We can see all of it, theoretically. So we're working right now on how to visualize that. But I would say it's been part of the conversation, but it's been pretty difficult for us to fully adopt it in a way that we would like to, or that we read about.
Great, thanks for your feedback. And from Bryan, from your perspective, I know you're coming from a commercial space, coming into federal. I would be interested to understand sort of where you are now and ultimately where you're coming from as well.
Well, where I am now is 3 weeks in, so I'm still learning where I am now. Where I'm coming from, I started down the path of focusing on value stream management from the perspective of how do I get continuous delivery done? And it started from, I need rapid feedback on quality. And there are things upstream of a team that are preventing us from getting that rapid feedback on quality, because those are things that are preventing us from delivering. And so it was moving left from delivery all the way back through to the beginning to get engaged with the business so that we can get back to the end user, find out, how they like it. So not only does it work, but is it fit for purpose as rapidly as possible? Ultimately with the goal of, I need to get to production multiple times a day, right? And to do that, I really had to focus, on pulling waste out of the flow. And so it was really focusing on pulling waste out, removing communication drag, all of that stuff. That's really how I got involved with it. And going back to metrics, I think metrics are key to that. You just can't do anything unless you're instrumented. And we're doing that pretty well at Walmart from the technical side, as far as showing teams how their flow was going. And I'm working to bring that also into Platform One and make that part of that product base so that we can make that available to everybody.
Excellent, great, thank you. Mara and Scott, do you guys have any insights into sort of the value stream management implementations perhaps that you've been doing with your customers, or any insights based on the comments of the team?
Beat you to it more. Everyone mentioned feedback, and that's how we got to discover value stream management as a necessity for Scrum and as a necessity for DevOps. And without that tool, and before we had that, before we were, providing this service, it was very difficult to explain, how to execute Scrum properly, right? And we were continually frustrated with, well, our customers want us to teach, to coach them on Scrum, but there's no feedback in the equation. And so to raise it up a level and to say Scrum and DevOps are more than the automation tools that you select. It's more than how to play planning poker, for story points. Those are all little minutia that people like to focus on, but let's focus on the big picture, which is how often are you getting your code to the user and incorporating that feedback into your backlog so that the user is influencing what you work on.
Great. Mara, any insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of interesting things that everybody mentioned already. I think Emily is speaking about people developing for years and never once even, showing their fruits of their labor to the customer is a very common topic that I encounter. And I think the more scary part is that it's okay. Like people think it's okay. People, you know, you will talk to a whole bunch of people and they'll say, oh yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years. Oh no, we've never even demoed to the operators or to the warfighters, whoever is the end customer. And I think that is like, there's a massive cultural, you know, change there that's probably necessary. But the other thing that Adam, you mentioned that actually is quite interesting, what I'm seeing very different from commercial to federal is on the commercial side, a lot of the, you know, the development and ops are very much kind of, you know, if you build it, you run it type thing. But on federal side, especially in the DoD, you can't, it's not necessarily as easy. You can't just let the developers own the product that they're building, right? And running it and supporting it. So Adam, you were talking about making the IT process a whole value stream. And I experienced that a lot when I worked with the Air Force, where that's a whole value stream on its own, right? But interestingly, on the commercial side, what I would sometimes say is, well, if you optimize that value stream and get it down to 2 days, if you can't get the features fast enough to that value stream, you're not in no better place, right? So like, it's an interesting conversation to be had where that split happens, but still not losing the track of the overall, you know, flow of actual value. I think that's an interesting conversation that I've seen.
All right, great. So building on that, on Mara's comment, I took a note too about what Emily had mentioned a little bit about some of the challenges or headwinds that she's faced in the federal space. And, you know, with that, there are probably a lot of different headwinds we can talk about, but you'd mentioned a little bit about access to the users and the feedback loop. And you know, what I'm curious about is, have you seen feedback directly from the customer about, you know, resistance to change or the application of a new methodology or new approach to solving problems? And with that, what have you done about that to combat that or to get yourselves through that conversation? I won't start with Emily this time, but I will start with Bryan, or I'll start with Adam now, and then we'll finish up with Emily.
Yeah, so I think there's like a fundamental problem in the government and federal space kind of around this topic, in that value is such a highly subjective term, particularly to us. Like in commercial industry, you can fall back on revenue and you can all speak the same language and with kind of ubiquity. And we can't really do that. The market doesn't really determine if we're successful. I could go build the world's best product right now and nail it from a user perspective. It doesn't really matter if some group of stakeholders somewhere doesn't agree that I've met their definition of value and funded me in the out years to continue doing that. So it's kind of like government values determined by whatever set of perverse incentives exists wherever the human that's sitting there to determine said value has against them. So as an example, from my perspective, if we have an application at Kessel Run that delivers a thing, that product team cares about the mission value being created as their set of value. The users probably in the same boat, right? So they're pretty aligned there. But then the acquisition folks around would consider value being in, you know, cost, schedule, or performance. Somebody else somewhere at some other level would be like obligations and expenditures. And there's some other guy somewhere who's determining whether or not you get funded based on your PowerPoint slide and your ability to tell a good story, and whether or not he went to the academy with some guy who's sitting in the right room of the Pentagon. So in that reality, it's really hard to have a conversation about value streams when you don't even agree on value in the first place. So, and we can't argue about flow in an organization because we're actually judging our ability to deliver from a performance perspective, because that's all hidden, as Emily mentioned, from years-long delivery cycle times, when you can hardly find anybody who's still in the job that was there when the project started in the first place. So how would you even know what value was when you set out to achieve it? So, you know, to answer this question internally, we just ignore all that as best we can and try to focus that value stream, that value on mission to the warfighter. And if we're going to be wrong, I'd rather be wrong in the way that gets me value to the mission users, and I'll ignore all the non-valuable noise to the degree that I can. But it only works to a certain degree. But so I think the people who don't get it exist everywhere. It's just figuring out how to ignore where you can and translate where you have to, and focus on the warfighters wherever you can.
Great, thanks. Bryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that value is really tricky. I really focus on waste because, I can measure waste pretty easily. I think everybody can feel waste. I think that if you're in the federal government, you can feel waste, and that you don't have to understand value to understand that if we remove waste, that things get better. And so to me, that's what it is. It's just pulling out wait times, improving quality, getting rapid feedback, all of these things. And I think there's something else I'd like to touch on a little bit is that, we're talking about value stream management, and, there's all these buzzwords out there that become buzzwords because people don't understand them. Agile, DevOps, I think, are really major offenders for that. And I think it's really important that people understand that value stream management is just the next phase in trying to improve the flow. DevOps that came just before it. Agile's before that. These are all interrelated. It's not an either or sort of thing. And that if you're really focusing, if you're saying you're doing Agile or you're doing DevOps, you're not focusing on value stream management, you're not doing Agile or DevOps. So how do you focus more on, let's just improve the flow of delivery and focus on the customer?
Great, thanks. Emily, you're going to go third this time, so you can use the other answers if you want to.
I love it because they, especially the subjective nature of value and the focus on waste. I mean, those are the exact two sides of the coin that we're looking at here, which is awesome. I think that we stumbled upon this waste concept and hadn't really called it by name. And so now I'm going to start thinking about it in that way. So I think that was fantastic, kind of an aha moment for me right now, because we're habitually trying to reduce waste and developing the wrong product. We're saying, we want this product in front of users ASAP. We want it there in MVP form as soon as we have anything that works, in order to get that feedback, so we're not going down the path of developing the wrong product. And I can give you a ton of examples of pivots that we've made because of that. And we've been able to dial in a solution so much faster because we've eliminated that waste of going down the wrong path for many months. We're only about a year and a half old right now as a program. And I think in a year and a half, we've pivoted probably a dozen times on different products and different things that we've created. So I think I'm going to add a little bit to that discussion. I think on the value stream management, I think a lot of people in the DoD don't even know what that is. So I wouldn't say I've gotten resistance as much as I've gotten a lack of appreciation for the process. Everyone wants the shiny rock. They want the thing at the end, but they don't want to focus on the pipeline, and they don't have an appreciation for the importance of focusing on your flow, focusing on your pipeline, and focusing on how you're developing these products. They want the product, and they're like, well, if I can just give you my requirement and you can develop the product and bring it back to me, we're all good, right? I think that just in general, what I've witnessed across the DoD is there's just a lack of appreciation for these flow processes. And when it comes to delivering software, and when it comes to keeping up with innovation, we have to be focusing more on flow and less on the shiny rocks as a collective within the DoD.
Great, thank you. Scott, just from a high level perspective, as you've been going through implementations with a number of federal organizations, what types of innovation are you seeing around value stream management, or innovation are you seeing to be able to modify the way that the federal government develops software and goes to market?
Well, unfortunately, very little. In just in that particular area. Now, I know I'm really highly jealous of Adam and Emily because they get to create these organizations, and they're leading the way. Every conversation I have with Emily, I'm encouraged that there is hope, that there is this movement happening. So it's happening. From a Centil perspective, company perspective, our biggest challenge is what Adam brought up, which is, how do you define value, and can we align on that? And what we're seeing is a lot of companies that they're innovating with tools, and often tools that they don't really know how to use yet. But their idea of value is very different from what the tools are going to help them achieve. So their idea of value is, I've got 400 things on my backlog and I need to get it done in 2 years. And then my customer, will give me another contract. So we're just trying to align. I mean, we are literally, our first step is, can we get you to say that mission success is the goal? And can we get you then to say, happy end users are an indicator of mission success? So if we can get those two things in place, now we have the opening to say, okay, well, we're going to track this. We're going to track two things. We're going to track how quickly you're getting things to your end users and how happy they are. And that's a whole, other can of worms, because unlike, Walmart or another commercial entity, I don't have metrics. So we've already talked about this. I don't have subscribers. I don't have downloads or likes or, any of those things. My users don't even have a choice most of the time. So they're just waiting on the program to deliver, and they use it. So it's not good. They're kind of out of luck. So where we are going with this is, we are trying to speed up that feedback process and define it better, so that we can incorporate all of that information back to the developers. But I will just say that we are fairly early on in this understanding, at least in the organizations that we work with.
Great, thanks. Brian, just from a high level perspective, we're getting some questions in about some of the topics we touched on a second, so we'll pause and take those questions in just a minute. But from your perspective, as we're sort of talking about innovation and finding ways to improve a process, in the case of Walmart, you mentioned the CI/CD pipeline, or being able to get feedback about quality as quickly as possible, and the need for value stream management there. I know you're only 3 weeks in, but I'm wondering if you've already hypothesized about, ultimately how you're going to approach that puzzle within Platform One.
Yeah, the last role I had at Walmart was leading the DevOps Dojo at Walmart, and that was literally our team's job, was to go and help do process improvement on teams. And we found that we had a lot of teams in a lot of different contexts, and the same process worked. And so my hypothesis is it'll work at Platform One as well as the rest of DoD. Is that we focus on shrinking cycle times. We push for continuous delivery is not an outcome or a goal. It's the tool to improve engineering efficiency and effectiveness on teams. That we start pushing for shorter delivery increments. We start pushing for integrating code more frequently, stories that don't last for 2 weeks, they last for 2 days or 1 day, and start shrinking all those things down. And all the waste starts bubbling up to the top. You start finding all this pain and toil, and you start eliminating those things. And, it makes developers' lives better, which is really why I'm passionate about this, because I am a developer and I want my life to be awesome when I go and join a team. And so really that focus on improving the quality feedback, removing toil, and shrinking those feedback, the cycle times, really helps teams live better lives.
Great, thank you. To expand on that a little bit, from a high level perspective, I know Adam has been, with Kessel Run since the beginning. And I assume there've been a lot of experimentation done within that development process to create that team and to create those teams and expand it and scale it. Just curious, from a high level perspective, what you found to be, helpful hints, if you will, to innovating quickly and ultimately getting where you want to go.
Yeah, sure. So I think things have definitely evolved over time. A couple of things that come to mind were when we first started, we were very much trying to use small cross-functional empowered teams to solve specific problems and get their product market fit, provide value to users. We were able to do that very quickly. That early on, our first dozen teams or so were able to get MVPs out into production in 60, 90, 120 days, which was great because then the rapid feedback would happen after that. And then it got a little bit more challenging about 1.5 years, 2 years in, when all of a sudden we needed all of these things to come together as this cohesive system of systems. Now we have kind of architecture to consider and all of these things that we're evolving over time, but in retrospect, I would have handled a lot differently and did a little bit more planning up front and those types of things. So that part of it was pretty interesting. And then from a process perspective, I would say that some interesting things happened. First was our teams were utilizing kind of pure XP practices from the jump. And one of the great things about XP is it limits your work in progress almost inherently, in that it's very kind of strictly taking storage from the top of a backlog. You're not taking on anything else until it's complete and accepted and all of those things. So I didn't really have a concept or a worry about work in progress and waste as an example in utilizing those practices. And then when I moved over to our platform organization, they were working in a pseudo Scrum thing that was a bit different. And all of a sudden my top priority became things like making sure our PMs understand how to capacity plan properly and how to understand that work in progress limits your ability to deliver. And all of a sudden, the nature of the things that I cared about changed from the application development side to thinking about, as Bryan mentioned earlier, what can you do to limit waste, remove constraints, and make flow be increased for the developers and their developer experience. So I think Kessel Run evolved over time in our scale and in our growth, and that we had to really think about, it's not really just good enough to think about value creation from a user perspective. Now it's how do you make the entire machine more efficient to enable value in all different parts of the organization? It's a different skill set and a different mindset that I had to kind of adapt over time.
Excellent, great. I want to pause here from a question perspective, from a scheduled question perspective, and go to the audience a bit. Luis Quintero asked some questions related to, I believe, Bryan's earlier comment. And he says, there's no question that metrics and feedback are needed to assess value. Can you just discuss how and what types of metrics are being considered? I maybe toss that to Bryan, since I think he's responding to your initial conversation.
When we're working on at the team level, it's really focusing on how frequently integrating code and what the development cycle time is on a story. How long it takes to go from started to done, and defect rates. You have to have balanced metrics. You can't just drive for speed and not focus on outcomes. And really focusing on those things. Not every team is going to have control of how frequently they deploy. There's constraints around hardware. There's constraints around all sorts of things that prevent deploy. But if you start focusing on how frequently we're integrating code and how long it takes to get a story done and what our defect rates are, you can make a lot of change at the team level pretty rapidly. And then from outside of that, what's the lead time to get an idea into production? Somebody asks for something, how long does it take to deliver that? Where do we need to track that and keep shrinking that. We need to look at why those lead times get extended. How long are those backlogs? How do we keep those backlogs under control? Because if I ask for something today and it takes a year to deliver, it's probably obsolete by the time it delivers, even in the Department of Defense. So, we really need to focus on those things.
Sure, possibly. Yeah.
Bart, can I jump in real quick? It's an interesting, so Emily, one thing that you were saying earlier about the lack of appreciation for concept of flow, and Bryan directly connected to what you were talking about, understanding the time it takes to do each step. A very interesting conversation I had about a month ago. I was presenting to a group of people that were introducing certain ceremonies into their organization to, practice Agile and do all the right things from a human perspective. And when I brought up a example of a value stream from a step perspective, like here's, example steps that your work goes through. I had a person in the audience who stopped me and said, I'm sorry, this doesn't relate to us because this is too waterfall. We want people to be doing these activities every day. And I was like, whoa, okay. So he did not even think about the fact that work goes through a very linear process, like there's no way around it. Like, of course, there can be planning activities and development and deployment happening every day, but a certain piece of functionality will go through those things. And it took me about 20 minutes to explain to him what the concepts even mean and what I meant by it. And then he was like, that's an interesting way to think about it. And I was like, okay, this is a good one.
Biggest
Laura,
thing
one of
right? I mean, it's really about reducing your batch size. It still goes through the same process, but in a tiny batch.
Yeah, and to Brian's point, figuring out how long and how stucky some of those steps are and improving those, right? And it's just funny that it was totally zero appreciation for that way of thinking, zero, but it was very entertaining.
No, that's actually one of the things I kind of rail against is that we're doing software development, and we have people coming in who've never done software development saying, do these ceremonies to do software development better, right? You need to understand how those ceremonies impact CI and how that impacts CD. If you don't understand that flow, then you're going to be talking a lot of theory at me, but we're not going to make anything better.
You literally just described the government though, right? Like how of all of the people who are leading software efforts around all of government, how many of us have actually done the work prior to being in that role? I love to see that number. I bet you it's scary.
It's the same in commercial.
Probably. There's a question in the Q&A chat from Dawn that says, how do you take a traditional organization structure and introduce concepts of value stream? What is the elevator speech? My favorite elevator speech that I've heard is, no matter how you develop software, you have value. Like you have, the work is flowing through your process. There's no company that doesn't have work flowing and then suddenly it starts flowing efficiently. Like it is already there. It's just about visualizing it and understanding, Brian, to your point, I think where is it slowing down the most, and rather, instead of pitching the value stream management, use it as a way to make improvements, right? Say, hey, we found that lead time, for instance, I don't know, backlog or UX design, whatever process is involved is the longest one. And then, use it as a way to just like make improvements, rather than convince somebody of value stream management a little bit.
Yeah, it takes 3 people 2 days to deploy something to production. It has to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and only when the moon is full, right? And we can make that better and reduce the cost and get it done in minutes. Would you sign up for that? I mean, I think that's a good elevator pitch.
So Justin Pauly had asked a question in the chat as well here, talking a little bit about some of the other constraints or challenges that federal presents to software developers in general. So as he's his question, my takeaway is from much of the panel is the federal approach is just basically not compatible with value stream management unless you completely revamp the entire structure all the way back to the congressional acquisition strategy. Can there be a middle ground? And with that said, perhaps provide some examples of where there might be some middle ground.
I'm going to jump in on that.
Sure.
I think that our middle ground right now, and where we can demonstrate a lot of the value, no pun intended, of refining these processes is within the labs. And the reason I'm saying that is that the labs have a lot of freedom where the SPOs don't. And so we're able to have broad statements of work. We have, we're not tracing, we don't have to have direct traceability to a requirement. We're given a lot more latitude on what we pursue and how we pursue it. And so I think that right now, that is where we can make the case, where we can say, let's demonstrate, let's show you, let's build it. and you guys can make a decision now and witness, rather than someone trying to sell it to you at the highest level. You say, hey, let's look at these examples where we've done it, and then with those examples, then the case can be made of yeah, we need to do things differently. I think in parallel, though, I think there is a push to be changing our acquisition strategy. I just read recently a MITRE paper on why the acquisition strategy is not compatible with software delivery, and gave some proposals for how to change the acquisitions rules for software. And so I think that some of that is happening in parallel, but in terms of just getting in and doing it, I think the labs can really do a lot in that area.
But on the other hand, if you're in a SPO and you're developing software today, and you're on contract, you're one of the big companies that's on the hook, and you've got to deliver something in 2 to 3 years, and you don't have users. And I think this is the Justin's hitting on something that we definitely see. You know, what are the workarounds? So I can tell you from our perspective, and I'd love to hear any other ideas, because this is a problem that needs to be solved, right? But the way to solve this problem is not to delay deployments or integrations until they're needed at the very end. We still need to act as though we are deploying to real users, right? And then in my opinion, I think what we just need to have are some proxies for users. So you might not be able to deploy into ops, but you could deploy into a production like environment, and you can find people, the types of people that might want to use your software, and have them use it. For the amount of money that we spend on software development in the DoD, we can afford to hire a couple of proxy end users, right? Test people that would provide that function. But absolutely, I think that's a huge challenge, and it probably needs a lot more work and attention on it.
And I would say to follow up on that, Scott, is that's a lot of what we set out to do in creating the Dragon Army operations environment, is to create those pseudo environments, those pseudo users, and to be able to deploy to that. We actually have now real end users. About a year into the program, we got a bunch of real end users that are using the commercial products that we've built. But prior to that, we were deploying to this pseudo environment, and it becomes our practice and exercise environment. So absolutely, I will say that there's a lot of work involved in setting that up. We set it up for one specific mission area and domain of space domain awareness, space traffic management, and space command and control. And so to expand that out into multi-domain, other mission areas, other domains, there are some challenges there, but I mean, we were able to do it in under a year and create at least a representative enough environment for the space environment in order to make progress. And so it's definitely not insurmountable to be creating these pseudo environments and getting pseudo users.
Yeah, and I think to touch on it a little bit, you know, the thing I try to instill in everybody is the mindset that the requirements are wrong, or we've misunderstood them, or they're going to change before we can deliver, right? And it terrifies me to go days without getting feedback on change. And so I can't imagine years. So for the concept of we don't have users yet, but we need to deploy, what we need to, in our context, how can we get increased level of confidence that those three things are fixed, that we've identified the right requirements, or we've understood them correctly, or that they're actually still valid. We have to do whatever it takes to get that done. And so if that's building bots that'll exercise things, if it's bringing in people to play with it, whatever the consumer is, how can we come up with a proxy for that consumer as rapidly as possible to get that feedback? We have to have that quality feedback.
if we, and I'll just say my last piece, because this is obviously something that I you know, a lot of us have been struggling with. I mean, if we can get that mindset adopted, that's going to be the key. Just that we cannot develop software without users or someone using the software to give. Actually, we cannot develop software without feedback, right? That's adopted, I think we'll see a lot of change very rapidly.
I think there's some other good questions, and I think there's one about measuring value. So there's a couple around just metrics and measuring value, what the measurement looks like. And I know, Brian, you briefly touched upon the actual, cycle times and steps, the time that the value takes to get through the process. But I think maybe we can expand a little more about what kind of other metrics, I don't know, you, Brian, or Scott, since you have a big, wider spread of customers, different customers, talk about a little bit of that. Like, what are the units? What did it actually means?
Oh, I use dollars. I think dollars is a good metric. So if we value stream map the process and we can see how much it costs for each step in the flow, right? And how do we reduce the total cost of the flow? And I had someone challenge me on this, and especially in commercial, oh, well, just offshore development because that costs the most money. Well, but your total expenditure for the entire flow goes up because of many, many reasons, which I won't go into right now. But if you're looking at the cost of the steps, you can increase value by reducing cost, right? And so dollars is a good metric.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times we say, oh, we don't have profit, so we can't use dollars, but we absolutely, I think, can use dollars, but we just have to use them in a slightly different way than the profit and loss side. And so I would love actually to work more of that into the metrics that we're gathering of are we reducing costs? Are we reducing our time to deployment, and by proxy reducing costs and starting to connect it back there? That's awesome.
Yeah, I think when we work with, I mean, this is easier said than done, but when we work with a whole bunch of our customers, we try to also introduce this idea of connecting, metrics, flow metrics, but with value metrics, actually like business results, and which, we sometimes say it's like cost, quality, value, cost, quality, and happiness. So even down to things like, employee happiness and satisfaction and turnover rate, even things like that. And then being able to, tie it back to the decisions you're making on the development side or the technology side is a pretty common scenario that we talk about. And it directly actually ties into one of the questions that was asked: how do you define value streams, or how do you define products? We actually try to get people thinking about it in these terms, like who's your customer, who's pulling value, what is the measure of success or the value, whether it's cost or, one of those categories. So that's kind of sometimes what we try to get people to think about.
We've had some conversations, and I'd actually be curious to hear the rest of the panel's perspective on this, because there are also mission level metrics, and what we've looked into so far are operational level workflows and our time to close out specific tasks or time to respond, or even with some of our simulated scenarios, how soon does the crew even know that there's a scenario unfolding, and trying to get metrics on that timeliness of our workflows, and how that meshes with the business, the process flow, the what I would consider like the DORA metrics of your deployment frequency and all of that, and how all of those can be used together. The mission level metrics are of course going to be very specific to what you're developing. And so everybody's is going to be a little bit different, but how do those work together?
I think they have to work together. Brian mentioned earlier the importance of like DORA metrics as an example. Like the balance between the tempo and the stability is the important part, not like the individual one of the individual metrics itself. I think it's the same thing when looking at it from an organizational perspective. The way that we like to think about it is our DORA metrics from a performance perspective, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and then there's usually a team-based metric that is unique to its context that's we call our, one metric that matters from a mission perspective, but they can change over time depending on where the product is and where the users are in that kind of life cycle of development. So as an example, when we built one of our first applications, it was to do this kind of like workflow for tanker planning. And our core metric we cared about was shortening the time it took to complete their part of this larger system, this larger process, in order to increase flow elsewhere. So we were able to deliver an application. It had about 6 users, took them about 6 hours or something like that. When the application was in, they were able to use 2 less users, and went down to like 2 hours as an example. And that was great. So then, but afterwards we followed that up to figure out where the value is being created. And we were like, okay, cool. So you have 4 hours of extra warfighter time. Like, what are you doing with your extra warfighter time? And they're like, oh, we're just going home early and we're playing more video games, right? And we're like, cool. So like, it was valuable in that we helped those individual people's time or lives, but it didn't actually affect the larger system that we were aiming to achieve. So we had to shift it a bit and figure out how we could measure something else that was more going to have a bigger impact towards the larger system that we were trying to achieve. So it's a kind of interesting learning for us to make sure that not only is tracking that initial metric important, but following it up with how is that affecting the larger value stream a little bit further down.
Oh, okay. So this is an interesting one. Alicia asked, how does individual product development team member ownership factor into value stream management? Is there a concept of an and-on? I don't know what that word means, but English is not my first language, so I'm just going to Google in the background. Well,
and-on is Japanese.
One of the things that I'll mention before I pass Bryan to you is one of the interesting things that I've personally experienced is that if you pick the right metrics and you use them the right way, ultimately, hopefully, you get to the same answer for leadership and for the people. Like if there's some sort of a pain point, I'm assuming it's the biggest pain point for both sides. It's just a way to get to that answer via, whatever metrics or approaches that you're taking. So to me, I think the answer should be the same. It should be the same. Both the developers or whoever's involved and leaders should want to improve delivery and get there faster. It's just a way of finding that common language. So Bryan, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to touch on that a minute, I think it's really important that people dig into metrics before they use them. Metrics are a double-edged sword, and they're easily weaponized by the wrong people. So it requires training. As far as individual ownership, I've always looked at a development team like special forces. I always have, and that you've got a team that's all focused on mission. They all contribute to the mission. The team has to win or lose together. Just because somebody climbs to the top of the hill fastest doesn't mean they took the hill. It means somebody got to the top. And if there's something that's going wrong, it's up to everybody on the team to individually take responsibility for, hey, I need to call out that something's going wrong because it's going to impact the team's mission. And you have to have that level of ownership. You have to have the ability to stand up and say, hey, wait, no, we have to back up, or this is even just wrong for the product. I disagree with this story for this reason, and we need to look at this.
I think one of the things, maybe particularly in government, since we have like mixes of teams and companies and contractors and all of those things, I think one of the most important characteristics of a leader in this space is being able to ask really good questions and like keep your detector up. So I think there's a lot of places where like you navigate your team or your organization, you can kind of get some smells of things that like don't look right or feel super efficient, that if you like dove in, asked the right questions, you can start uncovering some of the things that are like clearly inefficiencies, but may not be obvious if you don't have really good visibility into the entirety of your system. And so kind of like poking around a bit and asking those questions, I think has been a great tool for me to try to uncover things where like people may not even realize it. There's also like a Stockholm syndrome that exists where developers are just used to pain that like sometimes it's hard to uncover if you just ask them directly. So you have to find ways to try to like pull that apart.
No, on the pain thing, it's absolutely true. I didn't realize this. I realized I was in pain until I discovered that there was a better way to work. And now, one of the things that we've done at the dojo in Walmart was we just value stream map teams for the fun of it, just to show them their pain, to make them hungry to improve. And as soon as they saw the pain, they're like, oh, wow, that's painful.
Yep.
With that, there was a question from Chris Gallivan, talking a little bit about getting a systems view of your value streams, and potentially even sort of the dependencies within those value streams, so that you understand, ultimately if you're improving them by making localized improvements, or if you're actually creating a bigger problem for yourself. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about that from some of the experiments that you've done around, improving a value stream from end to end, and how you've gotten a systems view of that.
We definitely struggle with getting that system view of it, but I think the pain is worth the value you get at the end of it. Because I mean, all of the decision making should be based around understanding the current state that you're in. And I think that's super hard, particularly for DoD programs, when you have kind of acquisition professionals all of a sudden in charge of this complex, weird, strange, classified system that's been in the field for 40 years and like nobody can really describe it. It's really hard to make really good decisions. So it's worth the pain, but we do struggle with it.
Yeah, when we start out with an organization in value stream management, we start with one metric, which is lead time, and then we start adjusting, and we measure the response. So if we see our lead times getting longer, we know we've done something that we need to rethink. So it's for us, it's at least in the beginning, lead time, because that'll drive your feedback cycle. The other thing that we do measure, and I don't think anyone's mentioned it yet, is work in progress. And so that is our probably the number one, besides the user issue that was brought up. That's the number two issue, is the idea of starting too many things. So we can see that on a value stream map very easily, and people are often surprised to learn that lead time is going to improve with less WIP.
Well, I think we're coming to the top of the hour here. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for participating and listening in.